Greetings. As the world outside falls silent, let the boundaries of today soften. We are stepping into a place where time moves differently, and the only thing left to do is let go. Chapter 1. First steps into the ancient hall. The stone path stretches ahead, worn smooth by countless footsteps that have long since faded into memory. Each step forward brings a soft sound, barely more than a whisper against the ancient stones. The path leads gently upward, rising toward the great ceremonial hall that waits in the distance, its outline barely visible in the dim evening light. The air grows cooler as the path winds between weathered pillars that stand like silent guardians. These columns have watched over this approach for ages beyond counting, their surfaces carved with patterns that time has softened until they seem more like shadows than decoration. The stone beneath feels solid and reassuring, each footfall creating the faintest echo that dances briefly through the air before dissolving into stillness. Moving closer to the hall, the massive entrance begins to take shape through the gathering dusk. The doorway yawns wide and welcoming, framed by stones so large they seem to have grown from the earth itself. No doors bar the way, only the gentle transition from the fading light outside to the deeper shadows within. The threshold lies smooth and level, worn by the passage of those who came before, their purposes now lost to time, but their presence somehow still lingering in the very stones. The first step across the threshold brings a subtle shift in the quality of sound. The open air gives way to the enclosed space of the hall, where every small noise seems to find its place among the stones and settle there quietly. The footsteps take on a different character here, softer somehow, as if the ancient floor has learned to cushion sound and hold it gently. Inside, the air feels still and peaceful, carrying the faint scent of old stone and the distant memory of whatever ceremonies once filled this space. The walls rise up on either side, disappearing into shadows that seem welcoming rather than mysterious. High above, the ceiling rests in darkness, but there is no sense of oppression, only the comforting awareness of vast space held in perfect balance. The floor stretches ahead, its surface polished by centuries of use, until it gleams faintly in what little light filters down from somewhere far above. Each step forward reveals more of the hall's quiet grandeur, the way the space opens and flows, designed by hands that understood the importance of creating a place where stillness could gather and deepen. Along the walls, alcoves rest in gentle shadow, their depths holding nothing more than the accumulated quiet of ages. Some contain the remnants of what might once have been offerings or ceremonial objects, but time has worn them down to simple shapes that suggest rather than declare their original purpose. They rest there peacefully, part of the hall's quiet story, asking nothing and offering only their silent presence. The path continues deeper into the hall, each step a gentle progression into this space where time seems to move differently. The stones underfoot tell their own story through their texture, smooth in some places where countless feet have passed, slightly rougher in others where the traffic was lighter. Each variation speaks of the life that once flowed through this place, the daily rhythms of those who knew these halls as part of their world. Ahead, the hall opens into a wider space where columns rise like trees in a stone forest. These pillars stretch upward until they fade into the peaceful darkness above, their surfaces carved with the same soft patterns that grace the entrance. The craftsmanship speaks of patient hands and careful attention, of artisans who took time to ensure that every detail contributed to the sense of harmony that fills this place. Between the columns, the light filters down in gentle shafts, creating pools of soft illumination that shift almost imperceptibly as the last daylight fades outside. The play of light and shadow creates a rhythm all its own, a slow dance that has been going on for centuries and will continue long after this particular evening has passed into memory. The air moves gently through the hall, stirred by the smallest of breezes that find their way through openings high in the walls. This movement brings no chill, only a subtle freshness that keeps the atmosphere from becoming stagnant. It carries with it the faint sounds of the world outside, distant and muted, like echoes of a dream that refuses to fade completely. Moving between the columns, each step reveals new angles and perspectives on this ancient space. The hall seems to shift and change subtly as the viewpoint changes, walls appearing and disappearing behind the pillars, new alcoves coming into view while others fade into shadow. Yet there is nothing disorienting about these changes, only the gentle revelation of a space that has been designed to unfold itself gradually to those who move through it with patience. The floor here shows different patterns of wear, suggesting the paths that were most commonly taken by those who used this hall. Some areas are polished to an almost mirror smoothness, while others retain more of their original texture. These variations create a map of sorts, showing how the space was used, where people gathered, where they paused, where they moved with purpose or lingered in contemplation. Near one wall, a section of the floor rises slightly, forming a gentle platform that might once have held something of significance. Now it stands empty, its purpose fulfilled long ago, but the space still holds a sense of importance, as if the memories of what once happened there have soaked into the stone itself and remain, quietly present but undemanding of attention. The wall behind this platform bears traces of what might once have been decorative work, patterns and shapes worn almost smooth by time but still visible to those who look closely. These faded designs seem to flow and merge with the natural variations in the stone, creating an effect that is both deliberate and organic, as if the boundary between art and nature has been allowed to blur and soften over the long years. Continuing through the hall, the sense of vast space overhead becomes more pronounced. The ceiling, invisible in the darkness above, makes its presence known through the way sound behaves in this place, the subtle echoes that suggest great height and careful acoustics. Every footstep, every breath, every small movement of clothing creates its own tiny contribution to the hall's ongoing symphony of whispered sounds. The walls curve away into the distance, following lines that seem both planned and natural. There is a sense that this space has grown as much as it was built, that the civilization that created it understood the importance of working with the natural contours of the land, rather than imposing rigid geometry upon it. The result is a hall that feels both grand and intimate, vast yet welcoming. As the last traces of daylight fade from the high windows, the hall settles more deeply into its evening quiet. The gentle illumination that remains seems to come from the stones themselves, as if they have absorbed light during the day and are now releasing it slowly, maintaining just enough visibility to guide careful steps through this peaceful space. Chapter 2. Crossing the Great Threshold. The stones beneath release their gathered warmth into the cool evening air, creating gentle currents that stir almost imperceptibly around the ankles. These subtle movements of air carry with them the accumulated essence of countless ceremonies, the lingering traces of incense burned in devotion, the quiet exhalations of those who once gathered here in reverence and contemplation. Moving deeper into the hall, the space begins to reveal more of its true dimensions. What seemed vast from the entrance proves to be even grander, stretching away into shadows that suggest distances almost too great to comprehend. The builders of this place understood scale in ways that speak to something profound within the human spirit, creating spaces that dwarf the individual while somehow never making one feel small or insignificant. The threshold crossed behind now seems like a boundary between worlds, a gentle transition from the ordinary realm of daily concerns into this hushed sanctuary where time moves differently. The very act of crossing that threshold appears to have shifted something fundamental in the quality of attention, the way awareness settles into the present moment with unusual clarity and calm. Stone pillars rise at regular intervals along the walls, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of touch from passing hands. Each pillar bears subtle variations in the patterns carved into its surface, suggesting that while there was clearly an overall design governing their creation, individual craftsmen were allowed to express their own understanding of the sacred geometries that governed this place. The patterns themselves seem to shift slightly in the dim light, creating the impression of gentle movement even in perfect stillness. These carved designs follow no familiar tradition, belonging instead to the unique vision of the civilization that created them. They speak of mathematical principles applied with artistic sensitivity, of spiritual concepts expressed through form and proportion rather than explicit symbol. Between the pillars, alcoves nestle into the walls at comfortable intervals. Each alcove contains a simple stone bench, positioned at the perfect height and angle for quiet contemplation. The benches show the gentle wear of use, their edges rounded by the passage of countless bodies seeking rest and reflection. Some still hold the faint impression of regular use, as if the stone itself remembers those who found solace here. Above these alcoves, small openings in the wall allow the last traces of evening light to filter through. The light enters at carefully calculated angles, ensuring that even as day fades into night, each alcove maintains just enough illumination for peaceful meditation. The architects who designed this place clearly understood that true sanctuary requires not complete darkness, but rather that gentle twilight that allows the mind to settle without strain. The air in these alcoves carries a different quality than that in the main hall. It feels more still, more concentrated, as if these smaller spaces have collected and preserved something of the quiet thoughts and gentle prayers that were offered here over the long centuries. Sitting in one of these alcoves for just a moment, the sensation is one of being held gently by the accumulated peace of ages. Returning to the main flow of the hall, the sense of vast overhead space becomes even more pronounced. The ceiling, still invisible in the gathering darkness above, makes its presence known through the way even the smallest sounds behave in this space. A soft footstep creates a whisper that rises and spreads, touching distant walls and returning as the faintest of echoes, so subtle they might be imagined. The acoustic properties of this hall suggest careful planning and perhaps generations of refinement. Every surface, every angle, every proportion has been considered not just for its visual impact, but for its effect on sound. The result is a space where even ordinary conversation would take on qualities of ceremony, where whispers could carry meaningful distances, where silence itself seems to have weight and presence. Moving forward through this acoustic cathedral, each step becomes part of a larger composition. The soft sound of movement across stone mingles with the almost inaudible settling sounds of the ancient building, the tiny creaks and sighs that old masonry makes as it adjusts to the changing temperature of evening. These sounds create a subtle symphony that speaks of time and endurance, of structures built to last beyond the memory of their creators. The walls continue their gentle curve, following lines that seem both inevitable and surprising. There is something about their trajectory that suggests deep understanding of natural forces, as if the builders worked with rather than against the fundamental energies that flow through the earth itself. The result is architecture that feels grown rather than imposed, organic despite its clearly planned and executed design. As the hall curves gently to the left, new vistas open up ahead. The space seems to branch and flow in multiple directions, creating the impression of a complex but logical layout that could support many different kinds of gathering and ceremony. Yet despite its complexity, there is never any sense of confusion or uncertainty about direction. The path forward feels clear and welcoming, drawn by some quality of the light or the proportions of the space that operates below the level of conscious thought. The floor beneath shows subtle variations in its surface, gentle undulations that follow the natural contours of the ground on which this hall was built. Rather than level this natural variation, the builders chose to work with it, creating a floor that rises and falls in barely perceptible waves. Walking across this surface creates a rhythm that encourages a slower, more contemplative pace, each step requiring just enough attention to maintain the meditative quality of movement through this sacred space. Along the walls, niches appear at irregular intervals, each one carefully positioned to catch and hold what little light remains. These niches contain simple objects that speak of daily ritual and ceremony. Stone vessels for holding water or oil, carved implements whose purposes can only be guessed at, simple geometric forms that may have served as focal points for meditation or prayer. Each object shows the patina of age and use, surfaces polished smooth by countless hands, edges worn gentle by centuries of careful handling. They speak of practices maintained across generations, of wisdom passed down through direct experience rather than written instruction. In their simplicity lies a kind of eloquence, suggesting that the most profound ceremonies often require the most basic elements. The light filtering down from the high windows continues to fade, but rather than bringing darkness, this transition seems to awaken other sources of illumination within the hall itself. The stones of the walls and floor seem to hold a faint luminescence, as if they have spent the day absorbing light and are now releasing it slowly back into the space. This gentle glow provides just enough visibility to continue the peaceful journey through this ancient sanctuary. This luminescence appears to be a natural property of the stone itself, enhanced perhaps by some technique known to the builders but lost to time. It creates an environment that is never truly dark, never requiring harsh artificial light to maintain its welcoming character. The effect is deeply restful, providing vision without strain, guidance without glare. Moving deeper into the hall, the sense of entering something truly ancient becomes more pronounced. This is not merely old, but ancient in a way that speaks of civilizations that understood time differently, that built with the expectation that their creations would outlast not just individual lives, but entire eras of human development. The weight of this temporal perspective settles gently into awareness, bringing with it a profound sense of continuity and connection across the centuries. Chapter 3. Gentle Light, Dancing Shadows. The subtle glow emanating from the ancient stones creates patterns of light and shadow that shift almost imperceptibly as steps continue through the ceremonial hall. These shadows are not harsh or startling, but rather like gentle companions that move alongside each footfall, creating a quiet dance of illumination across the weathered surfaces. The interplay between light and darkness here feels purposeful, designed by builders who understood how the human eye finds comfort in gradual transitions rather than sudden contrasts. As movement continues deeper into the space, the eyes begin to adjust more fully to this unique quality of illumination. What seemed dim at first now reveals itself to be perfectly adequate, a soft brightness that allows for clear vision without any strain or effort. The luminescent properties of the stone appear to respond to presence itself, growing slightly warmer in areas where footsteps have recently passed, as if the floor remembers and acknowledges each gentle contact. The walls stretch upward into shadows that are not threatening but inviting, suggesting height and grandeur without overwhelming the senses. These upper reaches of the hall remain partially hidden, allowing the imagination to fill in the details of carved reliefs and decorative elements that surely exist in the darkness above. This partial concealment adds to the sense of mystery and timeless beauty that permeates the entire space. Moving forward, the quality of silence continues to evolve. It is not the complete absence of sound, but rather a canvas upon which the smallest details become audible. The soft whisper of air moving through hidden passages in the walls, the almost inaudible settling of ancient mortar between stones, the faint echo of each careful footstep bouncing gently off distant surfaces. These sounds do not break the silence, but rather enhance it, creating layers of quietude that feel both deep and alive. The temperature within the hall remains remarkably consistent, neither warm nor cool, but perfectly balanced in a way that makes the body forget about physical comfort and simply exist in peaceful neutrality. This climate control seems to be another testament to the advanced understanding of the original builders, who created an environment that would remain hospitable across centuries of changing seasons beyond these walls. Light continues to play across the surfaces in the most gentle ways. A slight movement causes shadows to shift along the carved details of nearby columns, revealing intricate patterns that had been hidden just moments before. These revelations come and go like slow waves, never demanding attention but always offering small rewards for patient observation. The stone itself seems to breathe with light, inhaling and exhaling illumination in rhythms too slow for conscious awareness, but perfectly timed for deep relaxation. The floor beneath continues its subtle variations in texture and pattern, each step revealing new aspects of the craftsmanship that went into its creation. Here, smooth stones worn to perfect evenness by countless generations of reverent visitors. There, slightly raised areas where decorative inlays catch the ambient light and reflect it back in soft gleams that never quite repeat the same way twice. As the journey through this section of the hall progresses, the sense of being held by the space itself grows stronger. The walls seem to curve slightly inward, not claustrophobically, but in the manner of gentle arms offering an embrace. This architectural feature may be real or simply an effect of the way shadows and light interact, but the feeling it creates is undeniably comforting, like being welcomed into a place of profound safety and acceptance. The air here carries the faintest suggestion of incense, not the heavy perfume of recent burning, but the absorbed memory of countless ceremonies conducted over centuries. This scent is so subtle that it might be imagination, but whether real or perceived, it adds another layer to the sensory experience of moving through this ancient sanctuary. It speaks of devotion, of ritual carried out with patient dedication across generations of faithful stewards. Moving further into the hall, new details emerge in the gentle light. The bases of the great columns reveal themselves to be more elaborately carved than was apparent from a distance, with flowing patterns that seem to tell stories in a visual language that predates written words. These carvings invite closer inspection, but in the spirit of this quiet pilgrimage, they are appreciated from a respectful distance, their mysteries remaining intact. The interplay of light and shadow continues to evolve with each step, creating an ever-changing, but always peaceful visual environment. What appears to be a simple pattern of illumination reveals new complexities as perspective shifts, as if the space itself is slowly rotating to present different faces of its ancient beauty. This gradual revelation creates a sense of movement even in stillness, of journey even in the most meditative pauses. The luminescence of the stones seems to pulse very gently, like the slow heartbeat of the earth itself. This rhythm is so subtle that it exists at the very edge of perception, more felt than seen, creating a connection between visitor and structure that transcends the merely architectural. The building becomes not just a shelter or monument, but a living presence that shares its breath of light with all who enter its sacred space. Chapter 4. Among the ancient columns. The vast space opens further, as footsteps carry deeper into the heart of the ceremonial hall. Each column stands like a silent guardian, its surface worn smooth by countless centuries of gentle air currents that have caressed the stone with infinite patience. The columns rise into the dimness above, disappearing into shadows that seem to hold secrets of their own. Between these ancient pillars, the air moves differently. It flows in patterns that have been shaped by the architecture itself, creating invisible pathways that guide breath and movement through the sacred space. The temperature here feels perfectly balanced, neither warm nor cool, as if the stones have learned to hold the ideal climate within their embrace. The spacing between the columns creates a rhythm all its own. Walking from one to the next establishes a measured pace that naturally slows with each step. The distance seems calculated not by rulers or measurements, but by some deeper understanding of how the human soul moves through sacred space. Each interval allows for contemplation, for the quiet appreciation of shadows and light. The carved patterns that adorn the bases of the columns continue upward, spiraling slowly around each massive pillar. These designs flow like water frozen in time, their curves and angles creating a visual poetry that speaks without words. The eye follows these patterns naturally, drawn upward and around, creating a gentle vertigo that is somehow comforting rather than disturbing. Light plays differently around each column, creating unique pools of illumination and shadow. Some pillars catch the gentle radiance and hold it, glowing softly like beacons in the quiet darkness. Others seem to absorb the light, creating depths of shadow that invite rest and reflection. This interplay creates a landscape of illumination that changes with every shift in position. The surfaces of the columns reveal themselves to be more complex than first apparent. What seemed like simple stone now shows layers of different materials, subtle variations in texture and color that speak of ancient craftsmanship. Some areas catch the light with a slight shimmer, while others remain matte and absorbing. These variations create a tactile quality that can be felt even without touching. The sound of footsteps changes as they move between the columns. Sometimes the stone beneath responds with a soft echo, while other areas absorb sound completely. This acoustic variation creates its own kind of music, a rhythm of presence and absence that accompanies movement through the space. Each step becomes a note in a composition that has been playing for centuries. The columns themselves seem to breathe with the space around them, not in any literal sense, but in the way they participate in the gentle circulation of air, the subtle shifts in light, the quiet settling of ancient stones. They are not merely supports for the structure above, but active participants in the atmosphere of peace that fills this place. Moving deeper between the pillars, new perspectives open continuously. What appeared solid from one angle reveals hidden depths from another. The spacing creates corridors and clearings, intimate spaces and grand vistas, all within the same continuous hall. The architecture invites exploration while never demanding it, offering discoveries to those who wander slowly through its embrace. The height of the columns creates a sense of proportion that feels both monumental and intimate. They tower overhead without overwhelming, their massive presence somehow comforting rather than intimidating. The eye naturally travels upward along their surfaces, following the carved patterns into the gentle darkness above, then returns to ground level with a sense of having touched something infinite. Some columns stand perfectly straight, while others show the subtle lean that comes with immense age. These variations create a human quality to the space, a sense that even the most permanent things participate in the slow dance of time. The slight irregularities become part of the beauty, evidence of the patient passage of centuries. The bases of the columns spread wide, their foundations merged seamlessly with the floor of the hall. This integration creates the impression that the entire structure grew from the earth itself rather than being built upon it. The boundaries between floor and column, between horizontal and vertical, blur in a way that makes the entire space feel organically unified. Shadows pooled differently around each column base, creating natural resting places for the eye and spirit. Some of these shadowed areas seem to invite pause, offering psychological shelter within the larger space. Others simply provide visual balance, dark notes that make the lighter areas seem more luminous by contrast. The air between the columns carries subtle variations in temperature and humidity. Some areas feel slightly warmer, as if the stone has been storing sunlight from ages past. Others offer the cool touch of deep earth, a reminder of the foundations that anchor this structure to the bedrock far below. These microclimates create a sensory richness that changes with each step. The columns stand in rows that create natural pathways through the hall. These corridors between the pillars guide movement without restricting it, suggesting routes while leaving choices open. The paths curve gently, following the natural rhythm of the space rather than the rigid geometry that might be expected in such a formal structure. Each column tells its own story through the patterns of wear on its surface. Some show the gentle polishing that comes from occasional touch, while others remain pristine in their isolation. These marks of interaction create a connection across time, linking present moments with countless past encounters between human presence and ancient stone. The carved decorations on the columns seem to respond to the available light, appearing and disappearing as shadows shift. What is clearly visible from one position becomes mysterious from another, creating an ever-changing gallery of ancient artistry. The designs seem to have been created with this interplay of light and shadow in mind. Moving between the columns becomes a meditation in itself, each step an opportunity to notice new details, new relationships between space and form. The hall reveals itself gradually, never all at once, ensuring that the experience of discovery can continue indefinitely. The architecture teaches patience through its very structure. The silence between the columns feels different from the silence in open areas. Here, sound seems to be gently absorbed and transformed rather than echoed or amplified. Voices, if there were any, would carry differently here, softened and refined by their passage between the ancient stones. But in this quiet hour, only the soft whisper of air and the gentle settling of the building itself can be heard. The columns create a forest of stone, each trunk unique yet part of a greater whole. Like ancient trees, they stand in companionable silence, their presence both individual and collective. The spaces between them become clearings in this petrified forest, places where the light gathers and the spirit can rest in the gentle embrace of enduring stone. Chapter 5. The Sacred Center, Echoes of Ancient Ritual. Beyond the forest of columns, the hall opens into its heart, a sacred center where countless generations once gathered in reverence. The space expands gradually, almost imperceptibly, as footsteps carry forward across stones that remember the weight of countless pilgrims. Here, the air feels different, charged with the memory of whispered prayers and solemn ceremonies that once filled these walls with purpose. The central altar rises from the floor like a natural formation, though its edges reveal the careful work of ancient hands. Carved from a single block of pale stone, its surface bears the gentle patina of age, smoothed by centuries of touch and devotion. The altar stands not imposing but welcoming, its modest height inviting contemplation rather than commanding awe. Around its base, intricate patterns spiral inward, their meanings lost to time but their beauty enduring in the dim light. Shallow bowls rest upon the altar's surface, their interiors darkened by substances long since dried to dust. These vessels speak of offerings made and received, of rituals performed under flickering flame and starlight. The bowls seem to wait in eternal patience, their emptiness somehow more profound than abundance. They hold space for memories that drift through the hall like invisible incense, filling the silence with the ghost of ancient ceremonies. The floor surrounding the altar bears the marks of countless feet, worn paths that curve in gentle arcs around the sacred space. These patterns in the stone tell stories of processions, of careful choreographed movements that honor traditions passed down through generations. The wear in the stone creates subtle valleys and rises, a topography of devotion that guides the eye in slow, meditative circles around a central focal point. Above, the ceiling soars to its greatest height here at the hall's heart. The dome overhead captures and holds the smallest sounds, creating an acoustic chamber where whispers could once carry to every corner. In this quiet hour, the space seems to breathe with its own rhythm, the gentle expansion and contraction of ancient stones settling into rest. The dome's inner surface bears traces of pigment, hints of what were once elaborate murals depicting scenes of cosmic significance. Narrow channels cut into the floor lead away from the altar, paths for libations that would flow in careful streams during ceremonies. These grooves curve and branch like the veins of a leaf, creating a network that speaks of ritual precision and sacred geometry. Now they lie empty, their purpose served, their silence adding to the profound peace that permeates this sacred center. The walls here bear different markings than those in the outer passages. Symbols carved deeper, with greater care, suggest words of power and blessing. These inscriptions seem to pulse gently in the shifting light, as if they retain some echo of their original purpose. The ancient language they preserve remains mysterious, but their placement around the altar suggests protective intentions, words meant to sanctify and preserve the sacred nature of this space. Small alcoves punctuate the curved walls, each containing remnants of ceremonial objects. Stone chalices, their surfaces polished smooth by generations of use, rest in these shadowed recesses. Carved figurines, abstract forms that might represent deities or spiritual concepts, stand in silent vigil. These objects feel charged with the accumulated energy of countless rituals, their presence adding layers of meaning to the sacred atmosphere. The light here behaves differently than in other parts of the hall. It seems to gather and concentrate around the altar, as if drawn by some magnetic quality in the stone itself. Shadows fall in precise patterns, creating a natural sundial that would have marked sacred hours during the height of this civilization. Even in the dim illumination of this quiet evening, these patterns remain visible, testament to the sophisticated understanding of light and time possessed by the hall's builders. Incense burners of various sizes dot the space around the altar, their bronze surfaces green with age. Some are elaborate, decorated with intricate reliefs depicting flames and flowing forms. Others maintain elegant simplicity, their beauty lying in proportion and subtle detail. Though cold now, they seem to exhale the faintest memory of sandalwood and myrrh, fragrances that once carried prayers upward through the dome's opening to the stars beyond. The acoustics of this central space create a phenomenon of profound stillness. Sound here seems to be absorbed and held, creating a natural silence that encourages contemplation. Footsteps that rang clearly on the stone floors of the outer passages become muffled here, their echoes shortened and softened. This acoustic dampening adds to the sense of sacred isolation, of being held within a bubble of tranquil space. Textile fragments, preserved in the dry air, cling to stone hooks set into the walls. These remnants suggest hangings that once added color and warmth to the ceremonial space. Though faded now to neutral tones, they retain hints of what were once rich purples and deep golds, colors reserved for the most sacred occasions. Their presence adds a human touch to the monumental stone architecture, a reminder that this was a place where people gathered in community and shared purpose. The altar itself invites closer inspection, its surface revealing layers of history in worn patterns and subtle stains. Here, generations of celebrants performed rites that connected them to forces greater than themselves. The stone remembers these moments, holding them in its crystalline structure like a vast library of spiritual experience. Each mark and wear pattern tells part of a story that extends far beyond recorded history. Around the altar's base, the floor is inlaid with different colored stones, creating mandalas of geometric precision. These patterns seem to shift and flow in the changing light, their complexity revealing itself gradually to patient observation. The stones themselves, sourced from distant quarries, speak of trade routes and connections that once linked this place to a wider world. Each colored element adds its voice to the visual symphony of the sacred space. The silence here carries weight, density created by the accumulated reverence of centuries. It feels almost tangible, something that can be entered and experienced rather than simply heard or not heard. This quality of silence creates space for contemplation, for the mind to settle into the rhythm of the eternal rather than the urgency of the immediate. Time moves differently in this sacred center, flowing like honey rather than rushing like water. The air moves gently through the space, stirred by convection currents created by the thermal mass of the stones. This movement is barely perceptible, just enough to keep the atmosphere fresh and to carry the faintest whisper of breeze through the ceremonial objects. The movement creates the subtlest of sounds, a breathing quality that adds life to the profound stillness without disturbing its essential peace. As awareness settles deeper into the sacred center, the layers of meaning embedded in every surface begin to reveal themselves. The worn patterns in the floor, the carefully placed objects, the precise angles of the stonework all speak of a civilization that understood the power of sacred space to transform human consciousness. Here, in this heart of the ancient hall, the boundary between the material and spiritual worlds grows thin, allowing glimpses of the eternal to filter through the veil of time. Chapter 6. Ancient Paintings, Silent Stories. The walls surrounding this sacred center hold their own quiet stories, painted in pigments that have somehow survived the countless years. These images emerge slowly from the stone surfaces as vision adjusts to the gentle illumination, their forms becoming clearer with patient observation. The paintings speak without words, their colors muted by time into soft earth tones that blend harmoniously with the natural hues of the stone. Each painted surface reveals layers of meaning that unfold gradually, like flowers opening in the first light of dawn. The pigments have faded into subtle variations of ochre and sienna, creating a palette that feels completely at home in this ancient space. These are not bold declarations, but whispered conversations between artist and stone, between past and present, between the seen and the sensed. The brushstrokes follow the natural contours of the wall, working with the stone rather than against it. Where small irregularities create texture in the surface, The painters have incorporated these features into their compositions, making the artwork feel like a natural extension of the architecture itself. This harmony between human creation and natural form speaks to a deep understanding of how art can enhance rather than dominate its environment. Along the lower portions of the walls, geometric patterns flow in endless repetition, their mathematical precision creating a sense of order and continuity. These designs seem to pulse gently in the soft light, their rhythmic qualities inducing a meditative state in those who gaze upon them. The patterns connect one painted section to another, creating a visual flow that guides awareness around the sacred space without rushing or demanding attention. Higher on the walls, more complex images begin to appear. Figures move through painted landscapes that mirror the peaceful quality of this ceremonial hall. These painted people go about their daily activities with the same unhurried grace that seems to permeate every aspect of this lost civilization. They tend gardens that exist now only in pigment and memory, their painted hands forever reaching toward painted fruits that will never be harvested. The painted figures wear expressions of quiet contentment, their faces turned toward activities that speak of a culture centered on contemplation and craft. Some figures sit in meditation, their painted eyes closed in eternal peace. Others work with tools and materials, their movements captured at moments of focused concentration. All of them seem to inhabit a world where time moves slowly and purpose is found in the careful attention to each small task. Between the figured scenes, flowing botanical motifs wind their way across the stone surfaces. These painted plants seem to grow from the wall itself, their stems and leaves following the natural lines and joints in the masonry. Flowers bloom in perpetual spring, their petals rendered in pigments that catch and hold the gentle light. Vines spiral upward toward the ceiling, creating vertical connections that draw the eye slowly skyward. The painting technique shows remarkable skill in its restraint. Rather than covering every surface with dense imagery, the artists have allowed generous spaces for the natural stone to show through. This creates a breathing quality in the visual composition, places where the eye can rest between the more complex painted elements. The balance feels perfect, never overwhelming, never sparse, but exactly calibrated to enhance the meditative quality of the space. In some areas, the paintings have worn away almost completely, leaving only faint traces of color in the protected recesses of the stone texture. These ghostly remains of former images create their own kind of beauty, suggesting rather than showing, inviting contemplation of what might have been while accepting what remains. The partial erasure by time becomes part of the artwork itself, adding layers of meaning that the original artists could never have planned. The colors used in these wall paintings seem to have been chosen specifically for their calming properties. Deep blues appear in flowing water elements, creating cool pools of visual rest. Warm greens suggest growing things, life continuing in eternal cycles. Golden yellows provide points of gentle warmth without harsh brightness. Together, these hues create a visual environment that supports the profound peace of the sacred center. As awareness moves slowly from one painted section to another, connections begin to appear between seemingly separate images. A flowing line in one geometric pattern continues in a botanical design several feet away. A figure in one scene gazes toward elements in another painted area, creating visual conversations across the walls. These subtle connections suggest that all of the paintings were conceived as parts of a larger whole, a comprehensive visual environment designed to support contemplation and spiritual practice. The interplay between painted imagery and architectural elements shows careful planning and deep understanding. Painted arches echo the actual stone archways, while flowing painted lines follow and emphasize the structural elements of the building. This integration creates unity between decoration and function, making it impossible to separate the artwork from the architecture that supports it. Some of the painted figures seem to be engaged in ceremonies similar to those that might have taken place in this very hall. They hold objects that echo the ceremonial items still present in the sacred center, creating temporal connections between the painted past and the tangible present. These visual links dissolve the boundaries between then and now, making the ancient civilization feel immediately present rather than lost to history. The painting extends all the way to the ceiling in some areas, where flowing designs create canopies of color overhead. These upper elements are simpler and more abstract, allowing them to function as visual backgrounds rather than focal points. They provide subtle variety in the upward view without competing with the more detailed work at eye level. Throughout all of the painted surfaces, there is a quality of timelessness that perfectly matches the eternal feeling of the ceremonial hall itself. Nothing in these images suggests urgency or change. Instead, they portray a world of cycles and continuity, where the same activities repeat in endless peaceful variation. The paintings become windows into a way of being rather than records of specific events, showing ideals of harmony and contemplation made visible in pigment and stone. Chapter 7. The Movement of Air. The quiet paintings seem to breathe with the hall itself, their colors shifting almost imperceptibly in the gentle currents of air that flow through this ancient space. These subtle movements of atmosphere bring life to the stillness, creating the softest whisper of motion that connects every surface and every corner of the ceremonial chamber. Air moves differently in old stone spaces. It flows with patience, following pathways carved by centuries of passage through corridors and archways. The movement is so gentle that it barely disturbs the silence, yet it carries with it the essence of the place, the accumulated presence of countless quiet moments that have settled into these walls like layers of memory. The breath of the hall rises from the stone floor, warmed by the day's distant sunlight that once filtered through high windows, now cooled by the patient darkness of night. This gentle circulation creates the faintest stirring, a movement so subtle that it exists at the very edge of perception, felt more than heard, sensed more than seen. Along the painted walls, this quiet air moves like the softest touch, barely ruffling the surface of silence. The ancient pigments seem to respond to these gentle currents, their colors appearing to shift in the dim light as shadows move across them like slow water over stones. The painted figures seem to sway slightly in this imagined breeze, as if the ceremonies they depict are still continuing in some timeless realm. The ceremonial objects in the center of the hall exist within these same gentle currents. The metal surfaces catch the moving air and reflect it back in the slightest variations of temperature and pressure. Stone vessels sit calmly within these flows, their surfaces neither warm nor cold, but maintaining the perfect temperature of ancient equilibrium. Air flows differently around curved surfaces than straight ones, creating tiny variations in pressure and movement that add texture to the atmosphere. The rounded edges of ceremonial bowls cause the gentlest eddies in the air, while flat surfaces allow the currents to pass smoothly, undisturbed. These subtle differences create a complex geography of air movement that maps the three-dimensional space of the hall in ways that touch rather than sight can understand. The vertical columns that support the high ceiling create their own patterns of air circulation. The stone pillars warm and cool at different rates than the open spaces around them, generating the softest thermal currents that rise and fall in slow cycles. These movements are so gradual that they measure time in hours rather than moments, marking the passage of the night in increments too gentle to disturb sleep. High above, where the ceiling disappears into deeper shadow, different currents flow in the elevated spaces. The air there moves more freely, less constrained by the furniture and objects below. These upper streams occasionally descend in broad, gentle spirals, bringing with them the cooler temperature of height and the particular quality of air that has rested against ancient stone. The painted scenes on the walls exist within all of these movements, their static images somehow participating in the gentle circulation that surrounds them. Figures depicted in ceremonial processions seem to process not just through painted space, but through the actual currents of air that flow past their surfaces. The painted ceremonies become part of the hall's respiratory rhythm, breathing with the stone itself. In the darkest corners, where painted details fade into shadow, the air moves more slowly, pooling in quiet spaces, like water collecting in gentle depressions. These pockets of stillness within the larger circulation create sanctuary spaces for the deepest quiet, where even the gentlest movement eventually comes to rest. The air carries with it the accumulated resonance of the space, holding within its invisible currents the memory of every sound that has ever echoed through the hall. Not as actual sound, but as a quality of receptiveness, a readiness to carry new sounds when they arise and to cushion them in layers of acoustic memory stored within the stone walls. These gentle flows of atmosphere connect the painted past with the present moment, allowing the ceremonies depicted on the walls to exist in the same air that moves through the actual space now. The continuity of circulation becomes a bridge across time, letting ancient and current moments breathe together in the same patient rhythm. The movement of air through the ceremonial hall creates its own form of meditation, a reminder that even in the deepest stillness, life continues its gentle circulation. The breathing of the space matches the breathing of anyone who sits quietly within it, establishing a shared rhythm between human presence and ancient architecture. As the night deepens, these currents grow even more subtle, settling into the slowest possible movement that maintains the living quality of the air while approaching the perfect stillness that matches the painted eternity surrounding them. The circulation becomes a lullaby made of atmosphere itself, singing the space to sleep with movements too gentle to disturb and too constant to forget. Chapter 8. Footsteps on Ancient Stone. The floor beneath extends in patterns of worn stone, each piece fitted to its neighbor with a precision that only centuries of settling can achieve. The surfaces have been smoothed by countless footsteps, each passage leaving its invisible mark on the dense material that forms the foundation of this ceremonial space. The stones themselves seem to hold memories within their weathered faces, speaking quietly of all the moments they have supported. Walking across this ancient surface creates the softest whisper of contact, a gentle reminder that others have moved through this same space in rituals and ceremonies that stretched across generations. The worn pathways show where feet most often traveled, creating subtle depressions that guide movement naturally toward the center of the hall where the most sacred activities once took place. The stones vary slightly in their texture, some bearing the smooth polish of frequent contact, while others retain the rougher surface that speaks of their original cutting. These variations create a landscape beneath the feet, a topography so gentle that it can only be sensed through the most careful attention to the way weight settles and shifts with each quiet step. The joints between stones have been filled and refilled over time, creating thin lines of different material that trace geometric patterns across the floor. These seams form a subtle grid that divides the space into countless small territories, each stone claiming its own small domain, while contributing to the larger whole that supports the entire ceremonial structure. Some stones show the faintest traces of staining, evidence of offerings or ceremonial materials that once rested upon their surfaces. These marks have faded to the palest suggestions of color, barely distinguishable from the natural variations in the stone itself. Yet they add another layer to the story written in this ancient floor. The temperature of the stone remains constant throughout the night, neither warm nor cold, but holding a neutral presence that seems to absorb and distribute the gentle warmth of any contact it receives. This steady thermal quality creates a sense of reliability, as if the floor itself serves as an anchor for the temperature of the entire space. Dust settles into the tiny crevices between stones, creating the finest possible accumulation that speaks of the endless passage of time. This dust is so fine that it seems more like a gentle mist that has chosen to rest upon the surface, rather than any ordinary accumulation of particles. It adds to the softness of footsteps, cushioning each contact with a whisper of ancient material. The edges of each stone have been worn to gentle curves, removing any sharpness that might have existed when they were first laid. This weathering creates a sense of infinite gentleness, as if the floor itself has learned patience through its long service to the ceremonies that once filled this space with movement and purpose. Light falls across the stone surface in patterns that shift almost imperceptibly as the night progresses, creating subtle changes in the way individual stones catch and reflect the dim illumination. Some surfaces seem to gather light while others absorb it completely, creating a varied landscape of luminosity that makes the floor appear to breathe with gentle variations in brightness. The sound of footsteps on this ancient surface carries a quality unlike movement across any modern flooring. Each step produces a soft resonance that seems to emerge from deep within the stone itself, as if the material remembers the weight it has carried and responds with the accumulated wisdom of countless contacts. Between the larger stones, smaller fragments have been fitted with extraordinary precision, creating a puzzle of natural shapes that locks together in patterns too complex for any contemporary understanding. The skill required to achieve such perfect fitting speaks of craftsmen who understood stone as a living material that needed to be coaxed rather than forced into its proper position. The wear patterns on the floor tell stories of processions that once moved in specific directions, creating paths of greater smoothness that can still be traced across the surface. These ancient highways of ceremony remain visible to careful observation, marking the routes that connected different areas of ritual activity within the larger space. As the night settles more deeply around the ceremonial hall, the stone floor seems to sink into its own form of rest, becoming even more stable and supportive beneath any weight placed upon it. The ancient material demonstrates its commitment to its foundational role by growing quieter and more solid as the hours pass. The relationship between foot and stone becomes a conversation conducted in the language of pressure and support, each step asking a question that the ancient surface answers with unwavering reliability. This dialogue continues regardless of whether anyone is present to experience it, as if the floor maintains its readiness for contact even in the deepest solitude of night. Chapter 9. Deepening Silence, the Stillness Within. The stone grows quieter still as darkness settles more completely through the ceremonial space. Each surface seems to absorb the weight of night, holding it gently within the ancient material. The floor beneath remains steady and sure, accepting whatever small movements might occur across its weathered expanse. Silence moves through the hall like a slow tide, filling each corner and alcove with its presence. The quality of this quiet differs from mere absence of sound. It carries depth and texture, as if centuries of whispered prayers and ceremonial chants have transformed into this profound stillness that now occupies every space between the columns. The air itself participates in this deepening calm, moving so slowly that each breath seems to last longer than the one before. Temperature holds steady throughout the space, neither warm nor cool, but balanced in a way that requires no adjustment or awareness. The atmosphere simply exists, supporting whatever life might move through it without calling attention to its essential role. Stone walls continue their patient watch, maintaining their vertical stance through another night of solitude. The surfaces show no signs of weariness despite their countless years of service. Each block remains precisely where ancient builders placed it, fulfilling its structural purpose with the same reliability it demonstrated on the first night after construction ended. Shadows rest in their appointed places, no longer shifting as the last traces of daylight fade completely away. These areas of deeper darkness become part of the architecture itself, providing visual rest for any eyes that might observe the space. The interplay between lit and unlit areas creates a rhythm that pulses gently throughout the hall without demanding attention. The carved details in the stone seem to settle deeper into their appointed forms as night progresses. Each curve and angle holds its shape with quiet determination, preserving the artistic intentions of craftsmen whose names have long since faded from memory. These decorative elements continue their role as silent witnesses to the passage of time, neither growing nor diminishing in their carved perfection. Dust particles that might dance in daylight now rest completely still, finding temporary homes on horizontal surfaces throughout the space. This fine layer of settled time creates its own form of documentation, recording the peaceful passage of days and nights through its gradual accumulation. The dust makes no sound as it settles, adding to the overall sense of gentle, undisturbed quiet. The ceremonial objects that remain in the hall seem to sink deeper into their own stillness as darkness surrounds them completely. Metal surfaces lose their ability to catch and reflect light, becoming part of the overall tapestry of shadow and substance. These artifacts maintain their vigil through another night, holding their positions with the same dedication they have shown for generations. Floor stones radiate a subtle coolness that speaks of deep stability and permanent foundation. This temperature remains constant regardless of the season above ground, demonstrating the hall's separation from the daily rhythms of weather and change. The stone's coolness provides a sense of groundedness that extends upward through the entire structure. Each column stands in perfect vertical alignment, supporting the weight of the ceiling with effortless strength. These pillars show no signs of strain or settlement, maintaining their original precision through countless cycles of day and night. The relationship between each column and its neighbors creates a rhythm of support that can be felt rather than seen in the darkness. The space between sounds grows longer and more profound as night deepens. Even the smallest noises seem to be absorbed by the stone before they can travel far from their source. This absorption creates a quality of acoustic rest that encourages deeper and deeper levels of inner quiet in anyone present to experience it. Breathing slows naturally in response to the hall's profound stillness. The rhythm of inhalation and exhalation begins to match the gentle pulse of the space itself, creating a harmony between human presence and ancient architecture. This synchronization happens without conscious effort, as if the hall itself guides visitors toward its own pace of existence. The darkness becomes complete and total, eliminating all visual distractions and encouraging a different form of awareness. In this absence of light, other senses become more attuned to the subtle qualities that define the space. Touch becomes more sensitive to the texture of stone and the movement of air. Hearing becomes more aware of the profound depth of silence. Time seems to slow and eventually stop within the ceremonial hall. Minutes stretch into hours, or perhaps hours compress into minutes. The usual markers of temporal progression lose their meaning in this place where change happens so slowly as to be nearly imperceptible. The present moment expands to fill all available space and consciousness. The stone floor continues its conversation with gravity, each particle maintaining its position through forces that operate far below the threshold of awareness. This molecular dialogue creates a foundation of stability that supports everything above it with unwavering reliability. The conversation never pauses, never falters, continuing through every moment of day and night. As stillness deepens toward its ultimate expression, the hall achieves a state of perfect rest that seems to extend infinitely in all directions through space and time. Chapter 10. Into Eternal Rest. This perfect stillness begins to embrace everything within its gentle hold. The air itself seems to settle into complete quietude, each molecule finding its place in the vast tapestry of silence. Even the smallest movements slow until they become indistinguishable from absolute rest. The ancient stones radiate their accumulated peace outward, creating ripples of tranquility that wash over every surface, every corner, every breath of space. This wave of calm moves without urgency, spreading at the pace of centuries, touching all things with the same tender care. Consciousness begins to dissolve into this ocean of serenity, boundaries softening until there is no distinction between observer and observed, between the hall and the awareness that perceives it. Everything merges into one continuous field of peaceful being. The last whispers of thought fade into the background like distant echoes in a vast cavern. What remains is pure presence, unmarked by time or concern, floating in the infinite space between waking and sleep. Here, in this threshold of dreams, all seeking comes to rest.